Welcome to today's workshop on graduate applications in sociology and anthropology. So I will introduce you to Project EduAccess and to your panelists and then hand it over to them who will take you over master's applications and what master's programs in sociology, anthropology looks like, and PhD program in sociology and anthropology, then talk to you about some career prospects and give you some general tips, and then we move to the Q&A. So we are Project EduAccess. We believe that access to higher education and leadership opportunities is a privilege that most people from marginalized communities are are systematically denied through cost, information, and dispositional barriers. And we try to improve inclusivity in these spaces by removing some of these barriers for marginalized communities in the global South. We do this by adopting 4 key interventions such as mentoring, counseling, role modeling, information advice, and guidance, capacity building, leadership skill development, and evidence-based advocacy. Today's session is a part of the many sessions that we've done on graduate applications to various courses. We have already done 2 sessions. We did 2 sessions yesterday. We did 4 sessions last weekend, and then we have another session today on courses on graduate applications to public health and health policy. And more generally, we've also done workshops on studying in Europe, studying in USA. So all of those are uploaded on our YouTube channel. So please do have a look at that. And the recording of this session and all the sessions we've done is also available on the YouTube channel. So with that, I'll introduce you to our very wonderful panelists who have also been mentees with us. So it's really amazing that now our panel is full of people who were mentees with us at Project EduAccess. We have with us Ankush, who is doing an MSc in Sociology from the London School of Economics and Political Science. And we have with us Srimoyee, who's doing a PhD in Social Work and Social Policy from Trinity College, Dublin. Thank you so much, Ankush and Srimoyee, for joining us. And we're so happy that you are now on the other side, taking a session. So thank you. And Ankush, I will hand it over to you now.
Right. Thank you for the introduction, Misbah. So I'll start by offering a glimpse into what anthropology and sociology programs include. So both anthropology and sociology graduate programs in the UK, Europe, and the US primarily offers in-depth training and understanding human behavior, culture, social structures, and relationships. Both of the disciplines blend theoretical frameworks with fieldwork or qualitative research methods to explore topics like identity, inequality, globalization, and cultural dynamics. So the master's courses, right? So, anthropology and sociology are often confused by people. People sort of use the terms interchangeably, but there's minute differences between the two. So the core modules in an anthropology program will include cultural theory, ethnographic methods, and linguistic anthropology. On the other hand, a sociology program will focus more on social theory, globalization, urban sociology, and inequality. Elective modules may explore niche areas such as medical anthropology, digital sociology, or even migration studies. For example, the University of Oxford's MSc in social anthropology includes modules like economic anthropology and kinship. On the other hand, LSE's MSc in sociology covers courses like race, class, and gender studies. Many of these programs culminate in a dissertation, which requires independent research or fieldwork on a chosen topic. The standard word count for dissertations is somewhere around 10,000 words. So you're allotted a supervisor, you have to work on the dissertation accordingly, you figure out the topic in consultation with your academic advisor and all of that. But the fieldwork is something that you have to carry out independently over a specific span of time, which differs from program to program and university to university. Right. Nomenclature of master's degrees. So in the UK and Europe, master's degrees are commonly titled MSc, meaning Master of Science, or MA Master of Arts. In the US, similar degrees may be called MA in Sociology or Anthropology, while MPhil is often used for research-intensive programs. Now choosing the country. So UK programs focuses more on research and critical theory, with universities like SOAS, University of London, excelling in cultural and post-colonial studies. On the other hand, the US offers interdisciplinary flexibility and applied sociology opportunities. With universities like the University of Chicago being renowned for urban sociology because that is where its origin is also often traced. Canada excels in community-focused research. So the McGill University offers anthropology with a focus on Indigenous studies. Australia provides opportunities for research in Pacific cultures with institutions like the Australian National University leading in anthropology. So it all boils down to what exactly you expect out of the program. If you're someone who's looking at, building up more on your research and critical theory, then the UK might be a good option for you. If you're interested in Indigenous studies, then Canada might be a better fit for you. Right, choosing the university. So program specialization. You need to ideally identify a list of universities which specialize in your field of interest. There's multiple universities and colleges which offer the same program, but the specialization that's within the or even like let's say the faculty. So the faculty expertise, you have to look for faculty members with expertise in your area of interest because they will be the one you can go to while you're studying and while you're researching for a dissertation and during an academic journey. So LSE, for example, is a hub for global sociology studies, while Cambridge is known for its long-standing anthropology department. For example, the Department of Sociology at LSE has quite a few renowned urban scholars, like David Madden, whose book on housing is pretty well known. There's Fran Tonkis. There's also Suzanne Hall, who's written about gender and speciality in the South African context. And QS ranking. So you have to ideally go for universities which are higher on the QS ranking as compared to those ranked low. I mean, this isn't the most important criteria, of course, but it helps you find universities that have consistently performed and enriched their students' experiences. Facility. So you also need to look at the fact, you also need to consider if the university you're going to is offering state-of-the-art research facilities, labs, and resources to support your academic and professional growth. Also, as stated before, check the faculty, the centers, the alumni bodies, and placement opportunities. So, the libraries at, let's say, University of Oxford, University of Cambridge, and even the LSE is renowned. So, if you were to go to university, I can't recall the name right now. If you were to go to university, where you might have to rely, where you might run into problems with accessing material because the library is not as extensive as the ones I named, then that could be a problem. So you need to also consider the facilities for which ideally you should reach out to the alumni. Srimoyee will take over now.
Okay, thanks, Ankush. So Ankush has laid the groundwork extensively about the master's program and what is expected, at least in the initial years of your postgraduate experience. I will veer the discussion more towards a PhD course, and as stated earlier, PhDs generally have lesser structure than a master's degree anywhere you go up to, because PhD is something which you facilitate all by yourself to a great extent, with great consultation and support from your supervisor. So again, as I've said earlier, PhD programs emphasize the need for independent research. So it is given that before you apply for a PhD program, you have a clear understanding about the research that you will be engaged with, and to have put some independent thought into it. So as I said, I've given a few examples, like the topics can span as vast as like digital cultures, migration, identity politics, environmental anthropology, and the list is kind of limitless. All it does make sense is if it makes sense to you as a person and you're able to draw connections with the contemporary realities, it makes a cohesive picture. That's when you go ahead with, that's sort of like the first steps of your PhD. Finding a supervisor is extremely necessary, and I would say imperative before you move ahead, because a supervisor is not somebody who is going to be there academically, but also sort of support your journey in tertiary means, be it from letting you find jobs such as like, working as a research assistant, as a teaching assistant, or even as a matter of fact, to be able to navigate larger processes in place, which every university abroad has established, such as an ethics process and the like. And every university has their own very long and very tedious methods to go about with it. So having a good rapport with your supervisor is not simply something which is purely academic, but also do realize that you're going through a 4-year commitment in your early adulthood or in your late adulthood, whenever you choose to start off with your PhD, and you have significant other emotional commitments. So you need to be with a good person throughout that entire tenure that you go ahead. Sociology and anthropology, both of them, and I think Ankush's done a very good job of defining how the two sort of are similar in some ways and different at the same time, but both of them do extensively require fieldwork. And mind you, barring maybe a few places where you're probably doing an archival research or a policy document analysis, a lot of your work expects you to go out into the field to talk with people. And I think with both Ankush and me, we have both had experiences where we had to go out and work extensively in different places. So be ready, mentally prepared for that before you go ahead with this degree. I would also like to specifically mention, because I TA myself as a teaching assistant. TA basically stands for teaching assistant. So you're often employed as a teaching assistant, sort of sometimes as a part of your PhD criteria or the contract that you're given. And sometimes you are sort of expected to do it because there might be an expectation that you wish to get reabsorbed back into academy. And at that point of time, a teaching assistant stint is looked upon fairly well. So these are, again, opportunities you should be, I'll be happy to expand on these in the later slides, but you should be having a conversation about these commitments before you begin. Moving on. Yeah, so PhD courses have a certain structure. One of the things that I'll firstly start off by understanding is sometimes a PhD in sociology or in anthropology are a part of a larger funded research project. So your supervisor might have received a grant from, say, the European Research Council or from ESRC or the like, which are these huge funding bodies which essentially go ahead and fund big researches, and your supervisor has won a grant and they wish to hire certain students to be able to work in that particular research project. And I would say this is a very good option for those of you who are not exactly sure about what research you want to do, yet you want to work within a structured space, and more or less the research topic is of interest of you. I would say start off with something like that. Start off by contacting your supervisors. And this is the first kind of PhD that happens. And again, you do come out of it for 4 years. And also, one of the bigger advantages of the first one is chances are most of them are already funded. So you don't have to apply for funding separately and source it, which is quite a big concern for a lot of people who are wanting to go abroad. So this is a very good option to consider. However, it does restrict and limit in some cases, because you have to kind of work with a team of other PhD graduates and with your supervisor. So there's a longer approval process of how you go about with, say, for example, presenting your papers or presenting your works, or how much of your findings you want to make public at which stage needs to be consulted more deeply, rather than the second kind of PhD, which I'm going to, which is driven entirely by you. This is something which I'm doing myself. And over here, what usually happens is you come up with your own research proposal, your supervisor agrees to it, and then eventually you take that work and you go ahead and do your own research for the 4 years or the 3 years, depending on the funding. The negative part of it is you do not often, most often than not, these self-driven PhDs do not come with funding guaranteed. So you need to source it from a separate fund or from the university, which can be a separate and a more tedious process. So the guarantee for funding is a little less in the second kind. So this is just to make all of you aware about the pros and cons of both the processes, so that you can take an informed choice going ahead. It is likely to keep in mind how long you can do your PhDs. I know for a fact PhDs in USA span close to 5 to 7 years, because they also introduce to a very rigorous training in research methodologies or just core modules, which is expected for all of you to be learned, especially before going into a PhD. So please keep that in mind as you all move ahead, because it has a longer time commitment. And if that's something which aligns with your personal goal or vision, just keep that in mind. And this is, again, as I've said, it's kind of really helpful for those of you who have little to no experience to research, and it's more structured. So it gives you it doesn't really push you into the research right at the beginning. It sort of paces you into it. So looking towards the States is a lovely opportunity in case you need more structure with your PhD. While on the other hand, in the UK, or by extension in Europe, largely it's 3 to 4 years of funding, and a lot of it is self-driven. So you are expected to come in with a certain degree of expertise for your subject, or you can find it potentially a little more overwhelming. That's not to say that you don't have any structure whatsoever. Chances are you need to complete a certain number of courses or audit a certain number of courses, but it is expected that you drive your research entirely on your own rather than relying on a structured master's or MPhil level course, which is dedicated in a more thought or research oriented degree. This is something where you sort of come in and build your own work and then directly move on to the field. Some PhDs have a structured component, and this is again something which I would request all of you to inquire per department. It's extremely prescriptive to particular departments, and they often have a certain number of modules which are available for you to be teaching, for you to be auditing, or for you to be taking as yourself as a PhD student. And it's important that when you decide on a supervisor, you potentially chat with them, with that particular university, or with that particular supervisor, on what these nitty-gritties are before you move forward. Next slide. Yeah, so choosing a country, and as I have said earlier, again, USA is really good for students who are interested in academic careers with extensive training. It offers also a lot of PhDs in United States of America are, again, grounded largely with funding which comes as a guarantee, which is again extensively helpful for those of you who are looking towards funding as a major source to decide whether you want to go ahead with a PhD. And they're more structured, and that gives a good option for those of you who are willing to dedicate 5 to 7 years for a PhD. I can also understand some of you who might want to do it at a shorter period of time, or who might be mid-career professionals wanting to just get the stint with PhD. In that case, the second option, where I've said UK and Ireland, where largely my experience has been programs are shorter and the students can benefit from a more structured approach, because due to the limited funding, what it does, or the limited time dedicated to your funding, it sort of helps you dive headfirst into research, so you don't end up really thinking too much. You kind of think about a particular idea, and then you sort of work it through as you go along with the process. And I always suggest those of you who have had some experience with working with your particular area of research, by all means, this is a really good opportunity to be in. Canada and Australia, something that I did think are also important. Remember that while you're choosing a country, research opportunities, because Canada and Australia have historically Indigenous populations, a lot of work has already gone into it. And additionally, even in Germany, for example, places like Heidelberg has a dedicated South Asian center where you can carry out your PhD. I will differ a little from the master's understanding. And again, while it's completely right to go ahead with what Ankush has said earlier with masters, rankings aren't exactly the metric to go ahead with when you're going with picking a place for your PhD. Because in a PhD, it's encouraged how you and your supervisor and the facilities of that particular university work out. It gives you a much broader understanding and a much broader scope to be able to explore. Mind you, you're like your own person at that point of time. So it is encouraged that you look at universities who have a good fit for your potential supervisor, who have students who are perhaps doing this kind of work already over there, because student profiles are also available online. So look into allied institutes, look at labs which are working in similar interest, and go ahead with that, because it's 4 to 5 years where you need to commit to a very good research. And if you have all these places, it really doesn't matter where your research is coming from, as long as it has rigor and as long as it has good substance and good guidance, chances are you'll be able to do quite well in it. Can we move on to the next slide? Yeah, so choosing the program is again something which I sort of go ahead with. Choosing your program, there are multiple programs for sociology, sometimes for anthropology. I have myself applied earlier for sociology programs. However, I found my own research to be fitting better, even though it was largely a sociology related topic, to be better fitting into the policy place where I am at currently. And that really helped me. So one of the things which I said was select a university with faculty expertise and research projects that align with your academic interests. And it is really helpful that you sometimes hop on a call with these people even before you go ahead with your own assumptions, because chances are over email, people can be nice. And again, I'm not saying that, like, supervisors abroad are not nice. It's just sometimes putting a name to the face really helps, and sorry, a face to the name really helps, and it really ensures that you are fully equipped to understand what the person brings to the table, what you bring to the table, and expectations are clearer. Supervision and mentorship. So look into supervisors with strong faculty and mentorship, of course, depend heavily on between the students and their supervisors. So make it explicitly clear. Something that I did earlier with my own supervisor was make it explicitly clear about funding. So if that is something which is a big detrimental factor or a big factor in your PhD journey, please make sure your supervisors are aware. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. And I kind of understand the apprehension around that, because it's quite important that you do your 4 years of work without any worry. So additionally, if you're going for a funded project, that's sort of already taken care of. But if you are going with a potential supervisor, then ensure that your visions are aligned broadly, that they understand what you bring to the table, you understand what they bring to the table, and you can work collaboratively, and you can both look at options further to sort of potentially explore. Funding and scholarships are again important. I am also aware that some of the people that I have come across are not people who might be fully funded. Again, being fully funded is far and few in between. So a lot of students often choose research assistantships and teaching assistantships or assistantships, or even external fellowships to be able to sort of fund their study. And sometimes supervisors may advise you by saying that while they cannot fund you immediately, they can definitely organize an opportunity for you to teach or to work at their lab or to work in an allied lab or with another cross-faculty space, so which does bring in a set of income. And I would really recommend that you all do take care of all of that. So make sure you chat with your supervisors very freely and frankly about these, because if you do get to understand that these dynamics are clear, it'll help you in the longer run. Research facilities are also important. It is quite difficult and might make you feel a little isolated to be doing your own research where absolutely no one understands your research. So look at the history, look into the work that has already been done, and understand that if you do go there, will you be supported with your work? So look into the labs, look into the research institutes. Sometimes universities have a dedicated center which is for, like, say, South Asian studies, say for sociology, digital sociology, or they recently received a grant which is again publicized heavily in all their news websites. Be aware of that and see how much of your own research aligns with that. And it's quite a good space to be in, so that you're sure and you're confident. Next one, if that's all right. Yeah, I think we skipped a slide. Did we? Okay. So yeah, how to go about with specializations. So again, sociology and anthropology are broadly subjects which I don't really need to go into and explain what all of it entails, but it is a very personal and an individual choice to see what works for you. The first would be to introspect, of course, how comfortable are you with the idea of researching long term, which means it sort of is being stuck with a topic for the next 4 years, 5 years, potentially 7 years. So how long are you able to commit to something over and over again every day for the next 4, 5, 6, 7 years is something that you need to come to peace with, and it's something that you need to put. And this is a very individualistic thought process which sort of goes in. So give yourself the time and space to think before you go ahead, and just don't jump into a PhD simply because everyone is doing it, but because you genuinely want to do it and you genuinely want to look into it. A second step would be to focus on what interests you as a person and what the larger body of literature has to offer. Sometimes I've seen a lot of folks have a lot of interest in particular subjects, but it doesn't really align with a lot of literature. So it's something which is broadly available in the literature. And I don't really let people think that that really should be a problem or something that should deter them. Instead, I say that look into how you can synthesize aspects which are already there versus what you already bring to the table. So this is important because you'll be carrying out an original piece of research. This is probably something you're potentially going to publish, you're potentially going to put out there. So be careful about that. I think another very broad misconception, which I sort of want to bust here, is we borrow a lot from quantitative sciences and we think that we're going to solve problems. And sociology or anthropology as subjects don't aim to solve problems. There's not a one solution fit all kind of an approach that you should have. You as social scientists are not supposed to solve quote unquote problems. So it is very encouraged that you can even say, for example, revisit an argument or debate made earlier through a different lens, which is exactly why we have things like paradigms, why we have the feminist paradigm, the postmodern paradigm. These are lenses through which you look into a certain phenomenon that has happened. And that in itself is a very unique discourse. And that's something that I have learned throughout my journey, is to be able to own that discourse, own what you bring to the table. So don't look into, while finding when I said earlier, when you're looking into the research gap and the larger body of literature and what you are looking into as an interest, don't aim to solve it. You cannot potentially solve it because it's so wide and so huge. So please keep that in mind. And lastly, when you specialize in a particular field of sociology, be very well versed in the contemporary debates and developments in the field. This is something which is extremely important when you're having conversations with your supervisor, or if you're sitting for an interview for your admissions, or even later on for your scholarships. It is extremely necessary that you are aware of not simply contemporary debates in your field, but also tertiary interests that are happening. So as I said, for example, if you want to work on digital sociology, it'll be helpful to keep in mind things like industrial and cultural sociology too, because they all have implications on the field of digital sociology. So please be aware of all of these nitty-gritties. I think the next slide would be, okay. Yeah, so I think I'll speak a little bit about the career prospects, and if Ankush wants to sort of chime in and out, I can like give the floor over to him if that's all right. Largely, again, with career prospects, graduates do end up working again. Largely, a lot of us wish to get reabsorbed back into academia, and NGOs or international organizations, which can be government or private sectors, sometimes a sociologist might not end up with the title sociologist. You might end up as a policy analyst, something that I work in. I work in a policy institute myself, so I do a lot of sociological work, but with the policy implications in mind. So I can see myself perhaps potentially becoming a policy analyst at some point in my life. You have social researchers, you have cultural researchers, and largely, as I said, and of course, while UN and World Bank are huge places and huge names to be at, qualitative insights are often utilized right now by a lot of private firms to understand the user experience, the user data, or like just how a person interacts with the product. So you have a niche built for yourself, even in things like marketing. So please remember that it's not archaic anymore, and you have the potential to get reabsorbed anywhere. Also, there's always an option to postdoctoral research where you get a larger grant or a funding. So the questions that remain unanswered in your PhD can be again looked back into when you are looking as a postdoctoral research with a funded fund to be able to introspect particular problems. If there's anything Ankush should like to add, I'd be happy for you to chime in.
Right. So as Srimoyee said, I mean, a lot of these organizations depend upon sociologists and anthropologists primarily of both the disciplines are pretty broad. So as I said in like a while back, anthropology covers a lot. So sociology, there's for example urban sociology, and as Srimoyee said, Stanford specializes in digital sociology. So urban and digital both form, like really important sites for a lot of policy and a lot of these policy think tanks, because and a lot of these governmental and non-governmental institutes which look at policy. And there's of course the UN and other research institutes. All of them consistently work on urban and digital policy, wherein your expertise as social scientists is basically filling the gap between tech and society. So I mean, there's a lot of people involved in tech. For example, there's a lot of civil engineers. I'm just giving an example of urban sociology. There's a lot of civil engineers, there's a lot of architects, but they often miss how the infrastructures they create impact people and societies. So that is sort of where, urban sociologist or an urban anthropologist or an urban geographer would step in to sort of give you to sort of give you a glimpse into how the infrastructures are affecting the social lives and vice versa, and how basically the infrastructure can be made much more friendlier. So that's where, I mean, you come into play as a social scientist if you do not want to, get ahead in academia, like Srimoyee said, um, as like a PhD person or like a postdoctoral scholar. I think Srimoyee can take it from here now.
Yeah, I'll just pop over for the general tips for the next bit, and then I'll again hand it over for Ankush to be able to chime in if he has more things to add. So I'll just end up with the general tips for doing a PhD application. And these are, again, something which I personally think should be important. And again, feel free to chime in if you have more to add. Make sure that you're absolutely sure that you can work on the allocated or chosen research topic. As I said, it's not a short-term commitment. It's not a term paper. It's a 4 years, 7 years journey, and it's a long thing. You sort of sit with it. It becomes a part of your life. So be very sure before you take that step. And it's very like a lot of people take up a PhD not really realizing the implications and the ramifications of it. And please consider, and when I say that you're absolutely sure of the work, it's not simply you and your professional work. Remember, most of us do our PhDs where our life, even as people, as children growing up with our parents, with our family, with our extended people, with our loved ones, also change dynamic wise. So please be aware about these dynamics and take a conscious, emotional, and at the same time, professional decision when you choose to go ahead with a long-term commitment, because you'll not be staying very close to them as you do right now, perhaps closer in terms of proximity in India. You'll be going much farther away. So this is like a general sort of tip to keep in mind when you go ahead. Ensure whichever country you end up choosing, research about the rights of a PhD candidate. This is extremely important because a lot of students do not come for a PhD with a full funding. And the reason I say this over and over again is because, say, for example, in Germany, you are recognized as a PhD candidate, you're recognized as a worker, which means you probably can work close to 40 hours a week, which means you'll be able to draw a larger pay than most of the other people. Sure, you end up paying tax, but you also get paid a much higher amount. Whereas in the countries where I work, for example, I'm in Ireland, and when I register with the government over there, I am only allotted 20 hours per week during the term time to be able to work. And if at that point of time, money is a big issue and it is a cause of stress for a lot of people, and more importantly, because lifestyles abroad are quite expensive, please keep in mind things like minimum wage, your rights as a worker, and as well as whether you have the right to unionize, and also things like leave policies. You might have health issues, you might choose to start a family, you might choose to have a lot of other engagements which will happen. You might choose to get married at that point of time. And all of these are, again, very rightful and personal decisions of yours. But please be aware of the laws of the particular country where you're going into. And I'm sure somebody at Project EduAccess would be able to put you in touch once you reach that step to be able to answer these questions. So please be aware. And I think that's not discussed enough, because when you lack hours, when you aren't able to put enough money on the table and enough food on the table, then your research will get affected. You need to be healthy and safe before you even go out and do your own research. Read before you sign. This is extremely important, and a key tip which I want all of you to keep in mind. PhDs usually get approved also with contracts, sometimes more importantly, your financial contracts. So say, for example, they give you a breakdown of how much you're paid annually and how much you're paid monthly, whether you're taxed or whether you're not taxed. So please keep in mind, sometimes, like for example, I'll give you a small insight of what happened. When I went to Ireland for the first time, my student stipend was not taxed, but my teaching assistant salary was taxed. And I, for the first 2 months, didn't have any idea that I was not being I was being taxed. I was basically receiving half the amount what I was supposed to be getting paid. And that did cause some degree of worry to me. And at that point of time, I had to contact the revenue office and ensure that I stop getting emergency tax from my next payment, and that I ensure that I get the amount that I'm desired to. So please read thoroughly. Sometimes the university may inform you, may not inform you. The university will always ensure that they have all the paperwork and document in their favors. But please keep in mind that you are knowledgeable about a particular country's laws and governing spaces, and talk to your seniors, talk to your supervisors about whether you want to have to register with revenue, whether you have to declare your assets on the like, and how far can your stipend be taxed or not taxed. Please be careful about these things, and read all of these contracts before you sign them, because once it's signed, it's off, because you've technically agreed to it in paper and in legal terms. So please sign, please renegotiate, please ask 100 questions, even if they are silly, because you should be very aware of your rights before going ahead. And lastly, factor in things like conditions of work, housing, and generally space as a whole. It is important that you do so, because basic needs need to be taken care of. Anticipate budgets. Some places are more expensive. Ankush, I'm assuming, lives in London, and I live in Dublin, and we have a horrible housing crisis, and we can both attest to the fact that it is quite difficult to find a place for ourselves within a reasonable budget. So when you're getting a stipend, please ensure whether that stipend is enough to be able to cover yourself, or whether you need to work extra, and these things, and all of these incur cost. So please have a chat with folks, please have a pre-departure chat, and feel free to reach out, because these are not questions you should be keeping to yourself. And this is, again, beyond sociology, beyond anthropology. These are necessary things that you should be keeping in mind before you start off with your PhD journey. Ankush, feel free to take the floor.
Right, and I mean, especially the last point. So, like components like weather, conditions of work, housing, So I mean, I know that all of this doesn't really factor in when you're looking at, oh, what do I want to study? Because it did not really register in my head too, until I realized that, I mean, of course, you're going to be you're going to be living in a place away from home. And I mean, in my case, I did my undergrad, I mean, in the same city that I grew up in. So I mean, it was far more difficult for me than it would be for someone, let's say, who's already lived away from their home for like undergrad and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean the weather and all. Yeah, I mean it really does factor in because London's pretty gloomy. I mean it's so gloomy, for example, that I have to take vitamin D tablets weekly. So there is that, and you have to look into the tiny aspects. You have to ensure that you check every box so that you can minimize discomfort if not completely alleviate it, because otherwise you'll not be able to study, read, research, let alone go out and have fun. That's completely different. If you're always thinking, oh, will I fall sick, oh, will I be able to get back home safely and all of that stuff. So London, I mean, has a decent public transportation system that's there. The housing is pretty down there right now, but public transport is pretty great. The weather sucks, you always have to carry an umbrella, so stuff like that. So ideally I would recommend, when you also shortlist, I mean, universities, the best thing is to figure out what cities they are in and to then reach out to the alumni studying there, preferably someone who's been there, the previous year, or like, I mean, not more than 3 years, I would say, because otherwise the experiences may differ, things change. Right. So I think that is about it for now.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Ankush and Srimoyee. So now we move to the Q&A part of the session. I will okay, so that's you can put your questions in chat and we'll read it out anonymously. But if you want, you can also raise your hand and ask your question directly to the panelists, but know that that will be part of the recording. Um, so there's a question in chat. I was looking at the UCD Sociology PhD program, and some of the professors' research interests seem to match with mine, but I am apprehensive about the kind of support that the university provides, the nature of supervisors there, and if it being an island curtails some opportunities that one can find in mainland Europe. An insider's view would be very helpful, Srimoyee.
Okay, thank you for that question. That is quite helpful. UCD does, as far as my knowledge goes, quite a good, so both social policy as well as a good sociology department. Being in an island, I would say if your research interests align, it shouldn't be much of a problem. Yes, I should make you all aware, if those of you who are planning to come to Ireland, at least on an Indian passport, you do definitely need to get a separate passport for both to, sorry, for you both need a separate visa to enter UK and you need a separate visa to enter mainland Europe. So you need a Schengen one to enter mainland Europe, you need a UK visa to be entering UK. That might be the only inconvenience that I can think of, and that might entail some degree of waiting periods over there. However, I myself am aiming to go to mainland Europe shortly after. It's not that you just enroll into a PhD and you immediately start going to conferences. You sort of take time to do your research. So I would say if everything in UCD works out and if the bursary works out, I think it's as good a place to be studying in comparison to any other places, be it in the UK or in mainland Europe. I would also recommend for you to check out the North-South program, which is a partnership done by the government in the Republic, which is the Republic of Ireland, and up on the north, which is Northern Ireland or the UK by extension. Over there, there's a North-South agreement, which also facilitates a lot of collaboration at that point of time, especially if your research is around migration. So like a lot of folks from Ulster University and the like often come down to give lectures from what I know. So I think place is not really that big of an issue, provided as long as your research is being supported, as long as your faculty is supporting, and if you're in need of funding, that is being taken care of. It is as good a place to be able to sort of sit and thrive. Similar problems, as Ankush said: gloomy weather, awful rain all the time, not so great public transport system as London, infamous for being late on buses, but if you're based out of Dublin, a lot of things are accessible rather than being based outside Dublin. So please keep that in mind while you do go ahead with it.
Okay, thank you, Srimoyee. Okay, there's a few more questions in chat. There's one that says, I was considering a freestanding master's at Columbia University as it doesn't have a 16-year requirement, but I wasn't sure about the value of the course for that reason. Any insights would be helpful.
Can I take it?
Yeah.
Right. So the freestanding masters, so that was, I think I was looking at that too, but eventually I didn't go for it because, I mean, the courses that they were offering within it, that was not part of my interest. So if, I mean, I think again, Chahat, right? So it depends on what you want to do eventually. I would suggest, I mean, from the advice that I received from a lot of people, including Misbah, if I'm not wrong, is that you should treat your master's like a bridge to wherever you eventually want to be. So, I mean, if you want to do a PhD that is somewhere around the theme that, is included in this freestanding masters, then go for it. Or else I think there are alternatives in Europe and the UK too. So I think this can be discussed at better length if we can get in touch with someone who's done the program already.
Yeah. Great. Another question is, Srimoyee mentioned pre-funded projects into which you can align your work as a PhD scholar. I was wondering how we can identify such opportunities. Would you know of any resources or platforms that collate funded projects, or do we need to rely on keyword searches?
I think for that, Find a PhD is a good place to sort of start off. I would also say EduAccess, EURAXESS. EduAccess is a nice place. It has got everything across Europe to be able to sort of collate funded opportunities and advertise it. My third opinion would be use your LinkedIn to the maximum of your benefit. If you like a particular researcher and the work that they are doing, follow them on LinkedIn. Maybe use Twitter, because sometimes things crop up on Twitter, even though I don't like going on Twitter myself a lot. It is a useful platform to sort of just have an account and log in from time to time and follow the people whose work you really appreciate. Chances are, often people who do get a big grant or a call, they do put out a call like that, where they say that I'm looking for PhD students for XYZ years with XYZ experience who have research interests in ABC area. And if you're interested, email me your resume and a short cover letter explaining why you want to do your PhD, and you can connect from there. So I would say LinkedIn is your best bet, of course, because it's a professional platform. Maybe just have a account on Twitter if you don't want to be into Twitter like I am. Just have an account just to follow these folks and just to keep updated yourself. Find a PhD, EduAccess, good places to be in and to keep a regular tab on. Sometimes set alerts. You can set alerts on specific searches. So say, for example, you create a custom search like sociology in like digital sociology in Colombia, for example, and starting from the year 2025 or 2026 onwards, and just click on the bell icon or something on the sort. Usually you can create an alert. What it does is send like whenever anything aligned to that particular setting crops up, they send you an email and you can quickly check into it. So have a functional email and look into it very carefully from time to time, if that helps.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, my department just switches the light off. Another question is, do fully funded scholarships fund your PhD, your field work, especially if it's based in your home country, or do you have to fund it yourself?
If I can take it, I think Ankush, you can take on if for masters and just specialize that. But for at least for me, I am doing my field work back in India, and usually what happens is the stipend that you get is enough to be able to cover your work back home, because again, there's a huge currency difference. So if you're doing it in a country like India, it is able to cover to a great extent your living costs and the like. However, I would say it is not a solution or not an answer which covers everything. It really depends on your scholarship. So for example, my scholarship says that I cannot ask like I can only ask for bursaries. So the scholarship that I have can only enable me to ask for bursaries if I am attending a conference, and not for fieldwork, because they assume that my quote unquote stipend is supposed to take care of my fieldwork, including that in my home country. And that means more often than not to be able to probably, like, not pay rent in one place. So you don't pay rent at the place where you're living. You just come back home and maybe you work through it, because you get a stipulated amount of money every month. And at least if you are looking to do it in India and you are probably getting your stipend in dollars or in euros or in pounds, I would say it is pretty doable to be able to come back and do it in India, because you do have that buffer thanks to the currency difference, if that makes sense. However, I would say once you do fix your scholarship situation with your potential supervisor, please ask them that if the department, or sometimes by extension the school, has enough money to be able to support your fieldwork separately, and do you have to have a separate process for that. Sometimes they don't, sometimes they do. It really depends on whichever university you end up in, but fieldwork should not be that big of a problem during your PhD, or at least so far in my experience. Ankush, if you feel free to add.
Right. I don't think masters also poses an issue per se, because most people really base their fieldwork around the city that they're studying in. So like for a lot of my peers, they're basing their field site as London or somewhere around the UK. Um, sorry, but for me, I'm thinking of doing it in Delhi. So how I am navigating is like Srimoyee said. I'm thinking, I mean, I'm considering not getting a place. I mean, I'm thinking of not paying rent in London while I'm in Delhi. So that way, you save out. Or let's say if you're on a fully funded program, you're funded based on the assumption that you're going to be in, I mean, in your city of study for the entire duration. So if and when you leave to conduct field work, and if you're not paying rent, then that money sort of, that amount sort of comes into play. You don't really have to think twice, but it takes a little bit of a planning. So let's say if you end up getting into a housing contract for 6 months and you have to leave in 4 months, so that way you lose money. So you have to be very particular about like the tiniest of things. You have to plan things meticulously so that you don't lose out on the money.
Yeah, I just to sort of add to that is that for and relatively it's not much easier, but there's more opportunities for funding fieldwork for PhDs than masters. So if you are applying, I would not recommend that you have a project in mind for your master's dissertation that requires fieldwork, because one, like it'll be very difficult to get funding, and second is that sometimes they don't let you do projects that require field work, especially if it's a 1 year master's, because there's only so much you are able to do, and that might create more issues. Okay, then there are two questions. Is employment harder to find as an international student post graduation, considering your status as an international student in the UK? And then second, does GPA matter a lot for your master's and PhD degrees? I do have a lot of research experience as an undergraduate student in my home country, but I'm just worried about this considering funding scholarship opportunities. So again, Ankush and then Srimoyee, whoever wants to, but yeah, both of you can take this.
Ankush, you can go on.
Okay. So, I mean, firstly, the employment, I think it depends on the kind of employment you're looking at. So, if you're looking at, let's say, research assistant positions, which are pretty competitive, then it's a little difficult. But if you're looking at, let's say, teaching assistant positions, then they are relatively easier to find. In my case, like the people I know, they've found it. Um, and right now there's like a +2 visa thing going on. So like if you're a student, let's say if you're a master student, you get like 1 year visa for that, the study visa, and 2 years +2 years is the work visa. So I mean that's up to you. You have to, I mean, the job market, again, no one can really predict it per se, but it is lately a little difficult. It's not really looking great for a lot of people. And but in, I mean, again, it depends on sort of like Srimoyee said, you have to be active on LinkedIn and Twitter to sort of figure out, because a lot of the job postings They don't even happen on LinkedIn. I mean, some of the job postings that I came across, they don't even happen on LinkedIn. People post about it on Twitter. So unfortunately, if you don't like to use Twitter, you might have to create an account just to keep tabs on all of this. You just have to follow a select few people and then sort of keep checking in, I don't know, twice a week or something like that. And does GPA matter a lot? Okay, okay. So GPA in I don't think it does. So as long as we get 65%, 70%, but it's also subjective. So for my program, I received a conditional offer by LSE, which basically means that they had accepted my application and it went through. But there were two conditions that had to be met. One was that I needed to get an English assessment test, and the other was that my GPA had to be 8.0. Sorry, yeah, at least 8.0 out of 10. So I mean, again, it depends from course to course. So like if you want to come for a sociology master's at LSE, then you would, I mean, because I was asked. So you might have to get an 8.0 out of 10 GPA, but then there are programs where they don't really focus much on the GPA. They're more inclined towards your experience as a researcher. And as long as you're getting a decent 6.57 GPA, then it's cool. And I think SOAS does not mind if your GPA is around 7. But LSE for some programs is pretty strict. But then for programs in, let's say, the Department of Media and Comms, it's relatively much more relaxed.
Yeah, just to add on, yeah, I completely share what Ankush said earlier in terms of apprehension. It is competitive and it's quite unpredictable. So, trust me, it's something, I guess, it's a question which even I think both of us individually in our places struggle with. If, like, can you get a job after all of it? But what can be assuring perhaps to help you sort of strengthen your decision is the +2 scheme, which is again available both. And I'm based out of Ireland, so even in the Republic, you have the +2 scheme available. You also have a thing called the hosting agreement, where I think they can help you probably extend it for a year longer, at least in the Republic. So again, as I said earlier, be familiar about the laws and the work permits and the things that of the particular country, because it completely depends. I know for a fact, and I'm so sorry if I'm probably saying it wrong, but I know for a fact that France recently, because of diplomatic ties, extended the visa, like the post-study visa process or the post-study years for a lot of Indian nationals. And it might have benefited for those. So if any one of you end up in France, probably there's a longer time period over there. So it really depends on these diplomatic ties, and new schemes come in every now here and there. But much like any other market, it is quite competitive. What usually happens is after the 2 years, you are expected to be like the company who is hiring you or the organization which is keeping you on their payroll. They are supposed to sort of vouch for you to be able to sort of stay back in the country and work. So that depends. Secondly, as I said, you might choose not to stay in that country anymore, mainly because of other commitments. You might want to come back to India and work, because that can be a priority potentially for you. You might not think about it now, but it can be 2 years down the line, it can be 5 years down the line. So all I'm saying is it is quite competitive, but Ankush shared some really helpful tips. Please be active. Just have an account on Twitter, have an account on LinkedIn, and follow the people thoroughly. And if you've come across somebody interesting, just follow them. Don't really hold back on your questions, don't really hold back on reaching out. And I think I can say for a fact, at least in my case, reaching out to people and just asking questions helped a lot. So please do that. GPA for PhD doesn't, again, I didn't do my master's abroad. I did my master's in Delhi myself. So I have no idea how. I think Ankush gave a better picture about that. But for at least for PhD, I applied for a sociology PhD in Cambridge. And yes, they had a very similar strict limit, which I had to do. I also had to give an English test for the same thing, very similar to what Ankush just said he faced. However, in PhDs, what is expected out of you is beyond you, like, I don't know, having a certain GPA or topping the class or the like. They expect you to be consistent. So I think that really worked in my favor. There were times where I did not top a class or I did not top a subject because I just didn't. But what did work, at least largely in my experience or in my favor, was I was consistently within like the top bracket, at least within my batch. And that's something my references sort of reiterated when they were uploading my references. So they were professors and they were people I have worked with. So once they vouch for that, I think with the PhD process, it becomes much more easy and they look into your research experience extensively.
Yeah, thank you. I think you both have answered that really well. I don't know if it was mentioned in the question about finding PhDs, pre-funded projects. We've done workshops on this as well. So there's the ERC, which is the European Research Council. There's Marie Curie that has, on their website, they have a list of all of the PhD pre-funded programs where, professors are looking for candidates. So I'd recommend, looking at those websites as well. And Srimoyee mentioned, sorry, I just remembered that. And again, if you just go to our YouTube channel, you'll find workshops on all of this as well. Okay, I know there's quite a few questions in chat again, and I'm mindful of time, so I'll try to go quickly over them. But if it's okay with the two of you, would you be okay staying for another maybe 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. There's a question that says, I'm looking to do a master's in anthropology. I want to build my ethnographic skills and would like to pick skills in the documentary making. Two, my area of interest in terms of research is memory studies and gender, masculinity in particular. Can you recommend some places in UK for masters that would aid me in expanding research as an anthropologist in these areas? It's it's a very specific question, so it's completely okay if the two of you don't have an answer to that.
I do know someone at least who's
Mm.
doing a PhD in, again, I'm so sorry, I'm not aware about the master's scene at all, but I am aware somebody is doing an idea on political representation and masculinity in London School of Economics, I think in the media and the visual communication department. And he speaks very highly about it every time we have met and chatted. So potentially LSE as a good option to go ahead. But again, Ankush is out of LSE. Probably he can attest or defy in that case.
No, I mean that department, yeah. And then there's also the Department of Gender Studies at LSE. And I would just recommend you to, I mean, the other option is it requires a considerable amount of time, is that you find out all the universities that you want to go to and then look at the departments and the faculty. So that is what helped me. I mean, when I was choosing, I didn't really want to do urban studies, but I wanted to do sociology with an emphasis on the idea of city. So, like I said, my department, there's a lot of faculty here who are sociologists, but they're looking at the city. So I would recommend that you reach out to, not reach out to, you should look at the faculty for different departments. There's Department of Gender Studies at LSE. Um, I think and social anthropology at SOAS, there is if you're looking at masculinity, right? If you're looking at masculinity, then there is Shannon Phillip at Cambridge, Department of Sociology. There is Sanjay Srivastav at SOAS, social anthropology. Uh, that's all I can recollect at the moment. And like Srimoyee said, Department of Media at LSE. So these three places, I would say.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you, Shima and Ankush. I would also recommend, rather than finding universities, I would recommend finding people who do work on the intersection of, again, filmmaking, memory studies, gender, and see where your topic would fit. Like, for example, some universities also have like memory studies as research groups and research centers, and whether that also looks at memory and gender. Again, you'll have to see and shortlist. I know, I think Warwick has a good department of history. I think their history department does a lot of work on memory, and Oxford also does a lot on memory and history. But again, whether that would be helpful for gender and specifically within that masculinity is something that you'll have to find through, again, like professors and research centers, and then you'll be able to identify the best place for you. Okay, there's a question in private chat. I'm considering a PhD in sociology. I completed my master's in sociology from India. I'm apprehensive about the job opportunities after PhD. While I like to do my research and I have a passion for that, I also want to prioritize securing a good job that makes me financially safe. I have noticed that the job market is highly competitive and is not great for sociology graduates. Could you talk a bit in detail about high-paying careers after sociology, master's, and PhD? Well, Aren't we
I mean,
struggling
I'm
with that?
as conflicted, but I think, Anamika, I sort of replied to that I think you also sent me a direct message for that. And to that, I had the advice that I think we were both speaking about earlier, is look into private firms and look into because technically public spaces are largely underfunded, and that's a situation across the globe. And that is unfortunately the reality that we have to live in. While the politics of it aside, I would say if money, and I completely understand that finance can be a pressing need for a lot of people, and passion's not everything. So I would suggest that you look into digital sociology and especially user centric qualitative work that is happening. I personally worked at a firm as at a AI firm based out of Singapore, and I am not at all quantitatively trained. I worked as a qualitative researcher. So basically, all the user insights that was being generated, I was working with the team to make sense of all of that. And that immensely, again, I was paid quite well during even my internship. So I could only imagine converting it into a full-time role would be quite self-sufficient. So if you want to chase quote unquote the money, that's the space. However, still again sort of reel back and think that if money is everything for you, and if it is also not everything for you, this is again a personal choice, and it's not really a place where I want to chime in myself because I don't know your situation. But digital sociology, user-centric spaces, and especially look into the job descriptions of private firms which hire qualitative researchers, and sort of see if your research interest sort of aligns with what they're asking for in your portfolio. And I think that can be quite lucrative, at least in my opinion.
Ankush, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I was also looking at the same thing, which is, I mean, what Srimoyee said. So that's also why my work looks at urban. It's also because you're more likely to be funded and you're more likely to be, I mean, or doing urban sociology for me lets me have the opportunity to move in and out of academic and policy spaces at the same time. The same goes for digital sociology. So what I think you could do is you could make sure that your specialization within sociology is on themes that are being looked at by a lot of research think tanks and even these international governmental organizations like UN and their affiliated ones. So questions of citizenship, health, digital sociology, migration, for example, migration studies, and all of these things you can do while doing sociology and anthropology, especially migration studies, because the question of citizenship and migration, the question of open borders and all of that, all of it is being negotiated right now. So, I mean, yeah, that's the advice that I would give, sort of placing yourself towards a specialization that lets you move in and out of policy and academia depending, and then you can decide based on the situation in future. Like if you feel you're financially comfortable, you can move back to academia, and if you feel that you need to sort of earn a bit more than what you're getting in academia, you can move back to policy.
Thank you. Thank you, Ankush. I am going to read out another question. Do we have to stick with academic recommendations while applying to PhDs? I believe students just share their referees' contacts to universities to get in touch with them for recommendations.
I can take that one. It really is contingent on also, hi Amit. Thank you for sending this in. I think it is quite helpful to be able to put in your academic references, because PhDs require you to have academic contacts. So your professors are somebody who will be able to vouch for your academic capacity better. However, this comes with a big caveat. Number one is what often happens is PhDs are not taken up by students immediately after their masters. They probably work for 5 years and then they aim to do a PhD. And at that point of time, the person's grown up and changed to a great extent. And the person who's better able to vouch for them or for their work ethic or generally for their professionalism is their professional contact. That's probably the company that they worked at and the like. So I think at that point of time, if the idea of a year comes in, a professional contact can definitely be substituted. However, it is encouraged that if you're getting back into academia, you do keep in touch with people who have influenced you, people you have worked academically, quote unquote, with. So your professors or somebody with whom you did a more academic piece of work with, to be able to vouch for you. that definitely goes for one of them. However, if some of the people who have had extensive work experience, that helps them to be able to substantiate and vouch for them as a character of who they are, because a professor might not know who they are 5 years down the line, 6 years down the line. So that caveat always works in, and I think every committee, while considering an application, is pretty cognizant of that.
Great. Thank you, Srimoyee. Then there's a question about freelancing. What's the freelancing situation in your respective country of study? Can you work online if no physical jobs are available? I can take for the UK. So if you are a student, so it depends on, how you're coming to the UK. Usually, if you are on a student visa, there are limited hours that you can work. You are completely like there's no requirement that the job you do in those 20 hours has to be like a physical job that you go to, but it can be an online job as well. It can be really anything. But if you are looking for a job after you've completed, then even if it's an online job, you are not allowed to be out of the country for, I think, more than a few months or weeks. There is a visa restriction on people who are employed in the UK to be out of the country. So it may be that you can work from home, but you will still have to be a resident of the UK in order for you to be employed in the UK. And that's a visa requirement. And Srimoyee can probably speak for Ireland.
Yeah, I think in Ireland, you can work, but you cannot work more than 20 hours a week if during term and if you are a full-time student. So that does become a little bit of a problem because uh, even if you're freelancing and you're getting paid, if you're getting paid more than the minimum wage of 20 hours per week, revenue is just going to tax you on that, or they're going to just send you a letter asking for an explanation. So it's better to avoid that. And I don't think they have a restriction on freelance work, as long as you are not exceeding that particular amount and as long as you're sort of disclosing the work that you are doing when to your employer. So I think that's pretty much what I know from Ireland. I have not sought employment in the freelancing space myself, so my employment's only from the institute, so it pretty much gets processed there and then.
Yeah. Then there's a question, does your bachelor's degree matter a lot for masters in the UK? For example, I have a degree in English and political science, but I'm applying for anthropology. Ankush, do you want to take that?
No, not really. I mean, as long as one of the things that you need for applying is a statement of purpose, right? So as long as you explain in the statement of purpose what degree you're applying for and why you want to do it and how your previous academic training connects to it, and if it doesn't connect, then you can explain that. For example, let's say you have a degree in English. Okay, so you can say that you, while doing English and pol science, you came across some questions which those disciplines are not able to answer for you, and thus you are looking to transition to anthropology. It is not really that difficult because a lot of the programs, even at LSE, are not something that a lot of us would ever be taught in India. For example, there's a program that I had applied to. It was my second reference. It's called Urbanization and Development. So none of us have that at our bachelor's level anyway. So my argument was that I've been trained in sociology at my bachelor's level. The research work I've done, the publications I have, my dissertation in bachelor's, all of them were looking at the city in some way or the form. City, questions of development, etc., etc. And so that's I wanted to explore those questions further and urbanization and development. So like that's how you have to argue. It doesn't really pose an issue as long as you're explaining enough that you know why you want to move out. You just have to be able to explain it well enough.
And Srimoyee, if you want to comment about that for a PhD.
Yeah, it really doesn't matter. I share a very similar journey like Ankush. I did my bachelor's in journalism and then I did my master's in an interdisciplinary master's, which was social exclusion and inclusive policy, which again is quite difficult to be found outside India, barring and even within India, barring like a few centers which are funded by the UGC. So my only focal point at that point of time was sort of establishing a thread of my entire research. So even in journalism, I was looking at the idea of marginalization and oppression, and that sort of progressed into me understanding policy analysis. And even when I was, say, for example, pitching to a sociology department or even to a policy department, I saw that the focal point for me was always gender and marginalization, and especially the caste and welfare dynamic. That's something that I had focused on. So I think I completely agree with Ankush. It's all about how you establish the thread and how you make sense of your journey. Nobody is very linear. So as long as it makes sense to you and as long as you can write it and make sense to somebody else reading your particular SOP, I think you should be fine. You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Srimoyee and Ankush. I think that was the last question. I don't see any other question in chat or in my personal DM. If there's any other question that you want to ask, now is the time to put it in chat or raise your hand. Otherwise, we will end the session. Okay, one question has come in my DM. I'll just read that. And again, if no more questions, then that would be the last one I take. When should we start working on applications? I have been trying to write a proposal for more than a year. However, since my research interests have been transforming and also along with my job, I haven't made any applications yet except one. Could you please elaborate on how much clarity do you need on your research proposal before applying and how much time did it take for you?
Okay, I will keep it short and sweet. It took me close to a year to be able to start from the process of writing a proposal to me finishing with getting a scholarship and an admission offer. So I started in June of 2022, and it finally came to fruition in around June of 2023. So I started writing my proposal in May of 2022. So what I would suggest for you to do, and that was my timeline, and it's also very personal. So I would just say that once you're sure about your research, start penning down your thoughts and just create a research proposal for yourself. And once you are done with a robust proposal and you are very sure about it, you can give yourself 1 year. So if I started in 2022 because I wanted to get admit in the September cycle of 2023. So give yourself that 1 year to be able to translate all these ideas and to follow up on the process. Because once you're done with your proposal, you send that proposal off to several supervisors asking for comments, feedbacks, and meetings. And that easily takes close to 2 to 3 months to be able to sort of finalize. And then you start working on your application, like your SOP, remodifying your research proposal for every particular school, and essay questions and the like. And sometimes for scholarship applications, the deadline's even earlier, almost starting like in November, December, January, as far as I know. I remember Misbah can attest to it. I sat for the Rhodes Scholarship too, so that was even happening earlier. So everything sort of happens parallelly. I would say, especially if you're handling a job and doing it at the same time, dedicate time out of your day to be able to focus solely on your application. It's difficult and it's going to be quite stressful for you for 1 year, but once you do it consistently over 1 year, I'm sure you're going to get something really good. And then around February and March is when you hear your results, and sometimes the next 3 to 4 months goes anticipating for a confirmation on your scholarship if you're applying for one. So that is roughly how timelines looked for me.
Great, thank you so much. And I think with that, we can end the session. This has been so wonderful. We had so many participants join us, although now it's reduced in number, but yeah, what a great and informative session. Thank you so much, Ankush and Srimoyee. So I'm just replying to. Sorry. Thank you so much, Srimoyee and Ankush, for joining us today and for taking the time out on your Sunday during your holidays to speak to everybody about graduate applications in sociology and anthropology. Thank you so much who joined us today. We just as a reminder, we have another session at 8 p.m. IST today on health policy and public health masters and PhD programs. So do join that if that's something that you're interested in pursuing. I'm also sending in chat some the link to our website where you'll find guides on writing application documents, ranging from your statement of purpose, your SOP to LOR and research proposal. And then second is the link to our YouTube channel, which is where you'll find the recording of this session next week and the recording of all of the university and scholarship related sessions that we've done over the past 2 years. So do have a look at those resources to get you started. We hope you find that helpful. And once again, Srimoyee and Ankush, thank you so much, and hope you all have a nice rest of your Sunday.
Thanks, Misbah. Thanks, Ankush. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye. Bye.